The 81 short chapters known as the Tao Te Ching have been translated more often than any other book in the world, with a single exception of the Bible. Like the Bible, the Tao Te Ching is a book whose appeal is as broad as its meaning is deep. It speaks to each of us at our own level of understanding while inviting us to search for levels of insight and experience that are not yet within our comprehension. As with every other text that deserves to be called sacred, it is a half-silvered mirror. To read it is not only to see ourselves as we are, but to glimpse a greatness extending far beyond our knowledge of ourselves and the universe we live in. The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. These words are among the most famous in all the literature of the world. They were first offered, however, not to modern Western people like ourselves, who, approaching the 21st century, are ready to admit that we have given too much place to discursive thought and rationalism. They were spoken some 2,500 years ago to a people and in a place, ancient China, far, far removed from us. Any work of art that communicates so endearingly over such enormous reaches of time and cultural diversity addresses, we may be sure, the essence of human nature and the human condition, rather than social cultural aspects that are peculiar to this or that society. The Tao Te Ching deals with what is permanent in us. It speaks of a possible inner greatness and an equally possible inner failure, which are both indelibly written into our structure as human beings. Under its gaze, we are not American or Chinese or European. We are that being, man, uniquely called to occupy a precise place in the cosmic order, no matter where or in what era we live. The Tao Te Ching is thus a work of metaphysical psychology, taking us far beyond the social or biological factors that have been the main concern of modern psychology. It helps us see how the fundamental forces of the cosmos itself are mirrored in our own individual inner structure. And it invites us to try to live in direct relationship to all these forces. To see truly and to live fully. This is what it means to be authentically human. But it's extremely challenging, and this challenge was apparently as difficult for the men and women of ancient China as it is for us today. We too try in vain to live full lives without understanding what it means to see. We too presume to act, to do, to create, without opening ourselves to a vision of ultimate reality. This opening and the way to experience it are what the Tao Te Ching is about. Historical information about the text and its author is scant and cloaked in legend. Even the little information we have is at every point subject to dispute by scholars, although many are willing to accept that Lao Tzu was a real person born in what is now known as the Hunan province of China, some 6 centuries before the Christian era. Tradition has it that Confucius once journeyed to Lao Tzu and came away amazed and in awe of the man. According to the tale, Confucius described his meeting with Lao Tzu in the following way. I know a bird can fly, a fish can swim, an animal can run. For that which runs, a net can be made. For that which swims, a line can be made. For that which flies, a corded arrow can be made. But the dragon's ascent into heaven, on the wind and the clouds, is something which is beyond my knowledge. Today I have seen Lao Tzu, who is perhaps like a dragon. The tale also tells that Lao Tzu was the keeper of the imperial archives at the ancient capital of Laoyang. Seeing the imminent decay of the society he lived in, he resolved to ride away alone into the desert. But at the Hangku Pass, he was stopped by a gatekeeper named Yin Shi, who knew of his reputation for wisdom and who begged him to set down in writing the essence of his teaching. Thus, the legend tells us, the Tao Te Ching came into being. Legend aside, there is no doubt about the immense importance of the text in the history of China and the Orient. The figure of Lao Tzu and his writings are revered by followers of the Taoist religion, and the message of the Tao Te Ching has been one of the major underlying influences in Chinese thought and culture for more than 2,000 years. Throughout the world, when one thinks of the greatest spiritual figures in the history of mankind, Lao Tzu is placed alongside Christ, Gautama Buddha, Moses, and Muhammad. Some remarks about the language of his work may be of help at this point. The word Tao has been characterized as untranslatable by nearly every modern scholar. But this statement should not lead us to imagine that the meaning of the Tao was any more easily understood by the contemporaries of Lao Tzu. It would be more to the point to say, only half jokingly, that the word Tao, and even the whole of the Tao Te Ching, is not readily translatable into any language, including Chinese. My words are easy to understand and easy to perform, wrote Lao Tzu, yet no man under heaven knows them or practices them. The present translation generally leaves the word Tao in Chinese. Those who have sought an equivalent in Western languages have almost invariably settled on way or path. Metaphysically, the term Tao refers to the way things are. Psychologically, it refers to the way human nature is constituted, the deep dynamic structure of our being. Ethically, it means the way human beings must conduct themselves with others. Spiritually, it refers to the guidance that is offered to us. The methods of searching for the truth that have been handed down by the great sages of the past, the way of inner work. Yet all these meanings of Tao are ultimately one. In this work, we are offered a vision that relates to the flowing structure of the universe, to the structure of our individual nature, both in itself and as it manifests in the details of our everyday actions in the world. No linguistic or philosophic analysis of this word can ever capture its essential meaning, because what is being referred to is an experience that can be understood only at the moment it is tasted with the whole of our being, simultaneously sensed, felt, and thought. And because this way of experiencing is entirely different from the way almost all of us act and think and feel in our usual lives. To say that the realization of metaphysical truth lies in the opposite direction from the way we usually experience our lives is not to say that a different method of thinking or experiencing is required. What is at issue is nothing less than the activation of an entirely new power within us, an entirely new movement of consciousness. The point is that man is built to receive, contain, and transform this power, and then to make his life a complete expression of it. Nothing else can bring ultimate fulfillment into human life. And yet, our lives are lived with little awareness or contact with this force of consciousness. We work, we love, we struggle, We eat, sleep, and dream. We write books and create art. We even worship our gods closed off from it. This is why every sacred teaching in the history of mankind begins as a revolution, incomprehensible, paradoxical, and mysterious. Whether it be the gnomic teaching of Lao Tzu, whoever he was and if he was, or the profoundly troubling doctrine of our unknowing brought by Socrates, or the exalted, hidden God speaking through Moses and the prophets of Israel, or the shattering sacrifice of love transmitted by Jesus. Every sacred teaching remains sacred only as long as it opens a path that has never before been opened, and yet always exists, and must always exist, for humanity. Look, it cannot be seen. It is beyond form. Listen, it cannot be heard. It is beyond sound. Grasp, it cannot be held. It is intangible. It is called indefinable and beyond imagination. Stand before it, and there is no beginning. Follow it, and there is no end. Stay with the ancient Tao, move with the present. Of equal importance in approaching this text is the life it calls us to, is the word day. This word directs our attention to the question of the expression or manifestation in our day-to-day lives of the supreme reality. The present text, following numerous other translations, render day by the English word virtue. But we must be careful not to bring our ordinary moralistic associations to this term. It is true that the word day introduces us to the ethical dimension of this teaching. But this is ethics that is solidly rooted in metaphysics and completely separate from ethics considered as the rules of spiritual morality, which vary from culture to culture, epoch to epoch, nation to nation, class to class. Day refers to nothing less than the quality of human action that allows the central creative power of the universe to manifest through it. Something mysteriously formed, born before heaven and earth, in the silence and the void, standing alone and unchanging, ever present and in motion. Perhaps it is the mother of 10,000 things. I do not know its name. Call it Tao. For lack of a better word, I call it great. Being great, it flows. It flows far away. Having gone far, it returns. Therefore, Tao is great. Heaven is great. Earth is great. The King is also great. These are the four great powers of the universe, and the King is one of them. Man follows earth. Earth follows heaven. Heaven follows the Tao. The Tao follows what is natural. The picture before us is of a cosmic force or principle that expands or flows outward, or more precisely, perhaps descends into the creation of the universe. The 10,000 things. Together with this, we are told of a force or movement of return. All of creation returns to the source. But the initial coming into being of creation is to be understood as a receiving of that which flows downward and outward from the center. Every created entity ultimately is what it is and does what it does, owing to its specific reception of the energy radiating from the ultimate formless reality. This movement from the nameless source to the 10,000 things is day. And the unique being, man, called here the king, is created to receive this force consciously and is called to allow his creation and actions to manifest that force. Such conscious receiving in human life is virtue. Thus, the movement that leads back toward the source is also the opening towards great action in our outer life. Virtue is an opening rather than a doing. In sum, Lao Tzu distinguished human virtue from what we ordinarily consider moral action by the cosmic nature of the force that human virtue manifests. Great action for Lao Tzu is action that conducts the highest and subtlest conscious energy. Ordinary moral action is, on the contrary, a manifestation whose source is lower down in the vast chain of being as it is portrayed in chapter 25. Tao, heaven, earth, the king, or man. The ego, our ordinary initiator of action, is an ephemeral construction which is formed by factors operating far beneath the level of the source in which, and the unenlightened state of awareness represents a kind of blockage or impediment to the interplay of fundamental cosmic forces. In other words, because of our identification of ourselves with the ego, what we ordinarily call action or doing, in fact, cuts us off from the complete reception of conscious energy in our bodies and actions. This idea must inevitably sound revolutionary, overthrowing the value we place on socially constructed systems of morality and efficiency. For the point is not only what we do, but the source from which we do it. The metaphysical nature of that source determines the ethical, cognitive, and pragmatic value of all human action. That is, the goodness, truth, and practicality of what we do in our life on earth. Our primary and perhaps only true responsibility is to become individuals who are also conduits for the supreme creative power of the universe. All other responsibilities, for knowing the truth, for feeling the good, and for accomplishing what is useful and effective, must flow from this. In our external world, in our day-to-day lives, and within the recesses of our psychological makeup. In the ancient traditions of the West, this idea has been known as the doctrine of man as microcosm. In Christian and Jewish mysticism, in the philosophy of Plato and the Hermetic tradition, in Islamic esotericism, we find that this idea pouring forth in an endless symphony of symbolic forms and profoundly articulated ideas. In the Tao Te Ching, it is offered to us as a whisper. Respect of Tao and honor of virtue are not demanded, but they are in the nature of things. Therefore all things arise from Tao. By virtue they are nourished, developed, cared for, sheltered, comforted, grown and protected, creating without claiming, doing without taking credit, guiding without interfering. This is primal virtue. We are now in a position to consider what for many of us is the most compelling aspect of the Tao Te Ching, namely the putting into practice of its teaching. The metaphysical doctrine now stands before us in outline, an unformed, ungraspable, pure conscious principle lies at the heart and origin of all things. It is referred to as the Tao. This principle moves, expands, and descends into form, creating the hierarchy, organically ordered cascade of worlds and phenomena called the 10,000 things, or simply the great universe. And this movement, especially as it can move through humanity, is called Day, virtue. At the same time, there is a great tide of return to the source, back toward the undifferentiated, pure reality of the uncarved block. This movement is also termed Tao. Finally, the supreme whole comprised of both movements is also given the designation Tao. Ching, by the way, simply means book. Man is built to be an individual incarnation of this whole. His good, his happiness, the very meaning of his life, is to live in correspondence and relationship to the whole, to be and act precisely as the universe itself is and moves. The question before us now is how. The Tao Te Ching offers a powerful and practical answer, describing in almost every chapter the way of living, also known as Tao, the way. The secret of living according to the Tao Te Ching is to open within ourselves to the great flow of fundamental forces that constitute the ultimate nature of the universe, both the movement that descends from the source and the movement of return. Empty yourself of everything. Let the mind become still. The 10,000 things rise and fall while the self watches their return. They grow and flourish and then return to the source. Returning to the source is stillness, which is the way of nature. Expressions like this show us why the Tao Te Ching has assumed such great popularity at the present moment. There is a widely shared realization that modern man has arrogantly and foolishly believed in science, a product largely of the intellect alone, and not of the whole man, as an instrument for imposing his will upon nature. And in the relationship among people, Europeans and Americans have often assumed the right to impose their values and desires upon peoples whose lives have not yet based themselves on the technological applications of science. As for Western religion, the Judeo-Christian tradition has sometimes been perceived, rightly or wrongly, as supporting this general tendency in the psychological sphere, especially insofar as it presents a fierce moral demand, a commandment that the individual override his own instinctive, emotional nature and conform his life to standards that suffocate the vital forces within the body and the heart of every human being. There is nothing new in this reaction against what is perceived as the tyranny of intellectualist and puritanical value system. Our culture heard it in its early criticism of the Industrial Revolution, in the work of Blake, Dostoevsky, Kierkegaard, and Nietzsche, to name only a few. The first half of the 20th century has seen aspects of it in the psychoanalytical movement, which sought to open our awareness to the forces of organic nature within us, and in the writings of the existentialists, who called for the recognition of a radical inner freedom, unfixed and undetermined by any laws, cosmic or societal. Finally, in recent years, we have witnessed the growing interest in mysticism and Eastern religion, which has introduced powerful new ideas into the currents of Western thought. Chief among them, perhaps, is the idea of the states of human consciousness, and the suggestion that the whole of our lives, individually and collectively, proceeds in a diminished state of consciousness, far from the capacities that would be possible were we to live at the level of consciousness that is natural to us. It is this last claim that can sound a true new note for most people, and that it provides the context in which the Tao Te Ching can speak in a stunning, fresh way about the practical questions of how to search and how to live. Once the immensity of the idea of levels of consciousness is felt, the message of the Tao Te Ching soars beyond social and philosophical criticism of our culture. We find ourselves in front of a teaching about nature and naturalness that compels us to see even our very legitimate current concerns about the environment and our planet in a way that is far more immediate and at the same time far more inclusive than we might ever have imagined. And we shall see that the same holds true for other urgent issues of our time, including the problem of war, the crisis of leadership, and the human-to-human relationship. To understand the practical importance of the idea of nature and naturalness contained in the Tao Te Ching, there is perhaps no better place to start than with a phrase that has become such a part of our contemporary vocabulary. That is, that it assumed the status of a cliché and even a joke, to go with the flow. Do these words in their popular use mean the same thing as living according to the Tao? Certainly not. The distortions of this phrase that have become popular suggest an unthinking passivity, along with a naive trust in the flow of outer events. But it is also a distortion to equate the ideal of living in accord with the Tao, with simply obeying one's inner emotional and physical desires, as well as one's hidden intellectual prejudices. The point here is well illustrated by the exchange between the Zen master Shunryu Suzuki and his American pupils. There is a big misunderstanding about the idea of naturalness. Most people who come to us believe in some freedom or naturalness, but their understanding is what we call yin kengedu, or heretical naturalness, the kind of let-alone policy or sloppiness. For a plant or a stone to be natural is no problem, but for us there is some problem, indeed a big problem. To be natural is something we must work on. Suzuki's further comments led us to consider the ideas of non-being, wu, and non-action, wu wei, which are central to the practical teaching of the Tao Te Ching. He goes on to speak in a smooth, natural mind. When you have that, you have the joy of life. When you lose it, you lose everything. You have nothing. Although you think you have something, you have nothing. But when all you do comes out of nothingness, then you have everything. This is what we mean by naturalness. And in the words of Lao Tzu, Tao abides in non-action, yet nothing is left undone. If kings and lords observed this, then 10,000 things would develop naturally. If they still desired to act, they would return to the simplicity of formless substance. To be natural, therefore, is not easy. Inwardly, it involves a state of openness or receptivity that is subtle, elusive, and active. It means becoming aware of that supreme creative power which, as has been said, human beings were created to contain and express. Or from another angle, one might equally say that to be natural is easy, but we have become such unnatural beings that to be open to this force is the most difficult thing in the world. It requires of us an effort that is wholly unlike anything we understand as effort, even including what is ordinarily called relaxation. Similarly, our understanding of nature as an external reality invites reconsideration. Our perception of nature is relative to the quality of mind or attention that serves as our instrument of cognition. We see only things, entities, events, and we do not directly experience the forces and laws that govern nature and the cosmos. Ever desireless, one can see the mystery. Ever desiring, one sees the manifestations. Let us note, a mind governed by desires can perceive only the world of appearances. What exists behind these appearances can be known only by the mind that exists behind the desires in ourselves. Let us therefore note, just as the universe contains the 10,000 things, creatures, worlds, stars, stones, so does our mind contain its own 10,000 things, namely desires, impulses, fears, and sensations, and the thoughts, logically connected or not, that serve them. Thus, a mind that is full of content knows a universe that is full of things. To go behind the apparent universe requires that we go behind the apparent mind. This may be called opening to non-being. At the same time, what Lao Tzu called non-being is a force of irresistible, ultimate power. It is most certainly not nothing in the usual sense of the word, nor is it existence in the usual sense of the word. Similarly, for ourselves, what lies beneath the glittering surface of our mind or ordinary sense of self are not simply other fabulous things, such as psychological black holes, that modern psychology has revealed to us under the designation of the unconscious. What lies behind the 10,000 things, or to use Western language, behind the appearance in ourselves and in the universe, it is not another world, another thing, or collection of things, not new stars, planets, or black holes, not new desires, sensations, or insights. What lies behind the 10,000 things is the awareness of the 10,000 things. What lies behind the ego is the awareness of the ego. But this awareness, what is it? We cannot say. Call it Tao. The other world, the real world out there and here is simply the world illuminated with the inconceivably powerful and subtle energy forces of consciousness, which we perhaps are beginning to recognize as love itself. Love, our Western civilization has always needed that word and no doubt still needs it. Speaking against those who would reduce the great Judaic revelation to a system of formal commandments, external demands, and legalistic rulings, the prophets of Israel rose as the hidden voice of conscious conducting the message of inwardness to the feeling of a nation. The shock of the prophetic voice was continually covered over by fear and egoism, and the thinking that served these weaknesses. My thoughts are not your thoughts, God tells Israel through the prophet Isaiah. I despise your feast days, God tells Israel through Amos. Again and again, God calls on Israel to open inwardly to the ultimate mystery that sends itself continuously toward humanity, and through humanity to the world we are meant to live in, what we call Earth. And throughout centuries, what we clumsily call Jewish mysticism speaks only of the need for humanity to receive, to open, to become, like a woman, toward the fatherhood of the ultimate mystery. Following the great line of prophets, there then appeared another prophet. Or was he more than a prophet? Again, but with the unfathomable newness, gentleness, and power of the highest energy, the message of love was given. and a life was lived. A death is lived on the cross, the shattering reverberations of which are still unfolding in our world. A sacrifice is offered and a gift is given, and humanity is confronted with the grievous truth that we are unable to accept that gift. We must work and struggle with a kind of effort totally new and unknown to receive the gift in the tissue of our being. We must set aside all that tense doing we call action. We must become female, just as creation itself arises as the mother of 10,000 things. The nameless is the beginning of heaven and earth. The named is the mother of 10,000 things. Female is all that receives and brings to birth. We are built to receive all the energies of creation in our consciousness and, through the mysterious activity of watchful silence, to allow them to gestate and unfold in the fullness of time. The great country is like low land. It is the meeting ground of the universe, the mother of the universe. The female overcomes the male with stillness, lying low in stillness. The valley spirit never dies. It is the woman, primal mother. Her gateway is the root of heaven and earth. It is like a veil barely seen. Use it. It will never fail. Lao Tzu's teaching about the female is bound to be of great interest in contemporary culture. However, there is no question here of direct application to any social or political issue having to do with the rights of women. It is purely and solely a question of the nature of humanness itself. What is a human being? Anterior to the division into man and woman? The point is that a human being can only act, that is, move outward, in a manner that is specifically human, to the extent that he or she can receive the gift of energy being poured out from the source. We are destined to be beings in which the primal two are in conscious, harmonious relationship. We are beings of two movements. It is our exalted but immensely difficult task to find the sensitivity and openness that is the great movement of return, designated by the word silence, at the same time that we function outwardly. Think, play, fight, and create. In the rough and tumble vortex of life on earth, the male moves out and the female returns. The male speaks and the female is silent. The male knows, the female is. This is to say, our speech must be rooted in silence. Our movement must be permeated by stillness. Carrying body and soul and embracing the one, can you avoid separation? Opening and closing the gates of heaven, can you play the role of woman? There is a tendency in some contemporary scholarship to offer modernistic psychological and political reasons for the prejudice against women in the history of religion and culture throughout the world. No doubt these speculations are valid in many cases and at their level, but insofar as the female designates a universal, metaphysical energy, the movement of opening and return, it is simply inevitable that the female becomes that which is forgotten, that which is not understood. Inevitable, that is, granted the fallen nature of humanity, our disconnection from the authentic possibilities of our life. In the ancient Chinese idea of yin and yang, yin is associated with ideas of the female as darkness, death, dissolution. Everything that is complementary to yang is male, bright, creational outpouring. No greater mistake can be made than to equate the female with mere emotions or so-called intuition. The emotional function in unenlightened men and women, in us, is as little open to the higher as the actional function in unenlightened individuals is an outward expression of the higher creative energy. The creation pours down in light and in accordance with rigorous laws of unfolding. It is uncompromising in its action, and it does not care for things in the manner that follows our limited, egotistical, fantastic standards. Heaven and earth are impartial. They see the 10,000 things as straw dogs. Similarly, no greater mistake can be made than to equate the male, the positive, active force of the cosmos, with mere thinking or so-called rationality. Thus, yin accords as little with historically conditioned concepts of the feminine as yang accords with historically conditioned concepts of the masculine. Seen in this way, both the male and the female force are hidden from us in our unenlightened state of consciousness. It requires a precise practice of meditation to become aware of energies as such and to observe for oneself the laws of the interaction and unfolding movement. This inner peace practice reveals that all phenomena everywhere depend upon the harmonious relationship of these forces called yin and yang, female and male, return and expression. To be fully human is to develop a power of attention that allows this relationship to take place within one's own psychophysical organism. A man in whom this attention is highly developed is called a sage, an enlightened human being. Although here, too, there are levels and degrees of inner attainment. As has been suggested, the study that leads to the emergence of this consciousness within ourselves is known as the path. Tao, understood as the way of inner spiritual practice. We have just introduced the term meditation. Setting aside most contemporary meanings of this word, we may characterize meditation as the process of becoming familiar with one's own real structure as a human being. Certain definite conditions, such as physical posture and mental attitude, have in every spiritual tradition been presented as necessary supports for this process. The Tao Te Ching does not offer this kind of advice. Apart from the mental attitude so powerfully communicated by the text, in fact, the most important features of the technical aspect of meditation can never be written down. The practice of meditation requires direct personal guidance of an exceedingly delicate sort, and as such constitutes a central aspect of the vast and all-important element of spiritual discipline known as the oral transmission. All effective spiritual transmission ultimately takes place directly between people. It can never be learned from a book. But important general and theoretical aspects of the practice can be expressed in words and images. And so, returning to the point at hand, we can say that one of the first truths discovered in the practice of meditation is that the movement of return and the movement back toward one's central self is a subtle, elusive, and fleeting experience. It is constantly being overridden by the automatically acting aspects of our outward movement, especially the racing chaos of automatic thoughts. Even more subtle and elusive, yet of cardinal importance, is the experience of both forces together within oneself. The metaphysical symbol of this central experience is the yin-yang diagram as a whole. That experience is the knowledge of and incarnation of the Tao considered as the whole of nature and of oneself as the whole. It is not the intention of this introduction to try to say more about such subtle experiences, but to focus on general theoretical aspects and implications. Nor is it the intention to try to introduce the teaching of the Tao Te Ching in the form of a system of philosophy. The chapters of the text are interrelated, but, as with every communication from a higher level of spirituality, the interrelation appears to us as replete with contradictions and disconnected images. There is bound to be confusion in our minds about the meanings of the yin and yang, and about which sense of the Tao is being referred to in many of the chapters. We can say, however, that one stage of the work of meditation is to discriminate between the two forces, the movement of return and the movement outward. Another stage, presupposing the experience of successive discrimination, is the simultaneous experience of both. A third stage would then be the experience of the moving together into a harmonious relationship of these two forces. That further stages exists, there can be no doubt. But it is also certain that we are not in a position to speculate about them. At every stage of the practice, the truth one needs to experience is hidden in the dark and bears the mark of death. This is the death of all that has been built up by the mind and ego. It is the death of forms and the momentary release or appearance of a formless energy. The seeker must allow himself or herself to be the female in relation to that which is waiting to pour itself into the seeker from above, whether it be called truth or ultimate energy. Yield and overcome. Bend and be straight. Empty and be full. Wear out and be new. Have little and gain. Have much and be confused. Know the strength of man, but keep a woman's care. Know the white, but keep the black. Be the valley of the universe. Being the valley of the universe, ever true and resourceful, return to the state of the uncarved block. The psychological condition of an individual who seeks in this way to experience both fundamental forces in himself must inevitably appear incomprehensible and even foolish to the unenlightened. And to the unenlightened parts of our own minds, which are accustomed, one might even say addicted, to rationality and the imposition of concepts and forms onto the outer and inner life. But I alone am drifting, not knowing where I am, like a newborn babe before it learns to smile. I am alone, without a place to go. Others have more than they need, but I alone have nothing. I am a fool. Oh yes, I am confused. Other men are clear and bright, but I alone am dim and weak. Other men are sharp and clever, but I alone am dull and stupid. Oh, I drift like the waves of the sea, without direction, like the restless wind. Everyone else is busy, but I alone aimlessly and depressed. I am different. I am nourished by the Great Mother. Hence it is said, the bright path seems dim. Going forward seems like retreat. The easy way seems hard, and the highest virtue seems empty. The greatest form has no shape. The Tao is hidden and without name. The Tao alone nourishes and brings everything to fulfillment. We may now consider the numerous verses of the Tao Te Ching that deal with the question of leadership, political and spiritual. Before citing examples, we need to emphasize the extraordinary difficult drama that awaits the individual seeking to embrace the yin and yang within himself. It is not for nothing that in the spiritual language of alchemy, this embrace, under the name alchemical marriage or the divine androgen, is presented as the culmination of long and difficult work on oneself. It is a question of developing an attention of such strength and sensitivity that two fundamental cosmic forces, which on one level are intrinsically at war with each other, come together under an even greater force of reconciliation. War is transmuted into love. This reference to the language of Western alchemy may help us confront the political and military language that enters into the second part of the Tao Te Ching. Otherwise, it may be hopelessly puzzling that the text which so consistently speaks of gentleness and yielding suddenly begins to speak of warfare, generalship, armies, and military strategy. This aspect of the Tao Te Ching has led some modern interpreters to take it as a blueprint for achieving purposes completely alien to the goal of inner freedom, such as military conquest or even effective business management and sales programs. In any case, the Tao Te Ching does speak of struggle and discipline quite as much as it speaks of non-doing and letting go, as in fact do all the inner disciplines of the great spiritual teachings, East and West. It is an extraordinary task we make conscious contact with the energy that reconciles the two great movements of universal reality at the levels in which they operate within the whole of the human psyche. The exalted vision that has revealed the necessity for this in-between state is surely what lies at the heart of the middle way, as it originally took form in the teachings from Buddha. The same vision informs the esoteric Christianity of Meister Eckhart, the fathers of Christianity, such as Gregory Palamas and Maximus the Confessor, and the Gnostic texts of early Christianity. It is the vision we find in the Jewish mystical writings known as the Zohar and the stories of Baal Shem Tov and his spiritual descendants. It is, as was said, the central work of alchemy. It is Arjuna's warfare in the Bhagavad Gita, the spiritual combat of the Zen Buddhist, sword of the mind, the way of the warrior, as spoken of Hakuin. To see the Tao's message as a permissive, passive, self-calming, going with the flow, in the way some more modern writers have it, is to make a mere fantasy out of a profound, subtle doctrine that blends into one vision the truth of mercy and the truth of rigor, to use the language of the Kabbalah. To make non-doing into non-struggling is to be an advocate of what has become merely one of the world's greatest half-truths. It is possible to understand this teaching concerning the in-betweenness of inner freedom as lying at the root of the Western doctrines of moderation and sobriety that we find in the philosophers of ancient Greece and Rome. But when we consider this way this Western idea has come down to us, It too must be seen as degeneration, insofar as it directs us toward a kind of Borgias metaphysics and psychology. Nothing in excess, as the Greeks and Romans expressed it, cannot at its root mean anything like the existential comfortableness or Puritanism it has come to signify. It must have originally emerged out of the same kind of doctrine we find in the Tao Te Ching and the countless other esoterical spiritual teachings of the world, namely, to struggle for an intention or consciousness that can embrace two opposite forces without being swallowed by either. It means living in the midst of both the forces of outer life and the forces of the mystical return, while searching in oneself for the consciousness that is at the root and that stands as the reconciling fulfillment of both these movements. The war is love. This love is war. In the light of these comments, we can now look at what our text tells us about the art of living in the world, and especially the practical art of leadership. What Plato spoke of both symbolically and literally as statesmanship. The question is how to live one's daily life in a way that supports and expresses this war of love, this struggle for contact with the transcendently vibrant non-being, emptiness, and formless energy that lies at the heart of the human and cosmic world. Surely the following verses and those like them in the text tell us something essential about how to govern and how to fight. The historic context of ancient Chinese society, its political strife and social unrest, cannot be ignored. But we must ask ourselves, to what extent do these verses teach us about how to achieve success in the forms by which society enables us to deal with each other? And to what extent do they give us an attitude toward these forms that enables us to speak within while we are compelled to move and act in the social context? To what extent are spiritual principles meant to serve social psychological goals? And to what extent can social activity become a milieu in which we search for that which transcends society? Do we meditate in order to win? Or can we study the law of pure inner work operating within the outer battlefield of life? Therefore, the stiff and unbending is the disciple of death. The gentle and yielding is the disciple of life. Thus, an army without flexibility never wins a battle. A tree that is unbending is easily broken. The hard and strong will fall, while the soft and weak will overcome. People usually fail when they are on the verge of success. So give as much care to the end as to the beginning. Then there will be no failure. Therefore the sage seeks freedom from desire. He does not collect precious things. He learns not to hold onto ideas. He brings men back to what they have lost. He helps the 10,000 things find their own nature, but refrains from action. In the symbolic language of sacred writing, the outer and the inner are spoken of with images of and formulations that embrace the laws of one's own inner world and the great outer world simultaneously. In this language, words such as leader, warrior, king, and sage refer both to an individual in relationship to other people and to a part of oneself in its relationship to the other parts that make up one's total inner world. There is or can be a leader in myself, a warrior, a king, and a sage. There are armies and peoples within myself. There are desires, fears, hopes, needs. There are timid and brave impulses. There are thinkers, dreamers, scoundrels, and madmen. In the Old Testament, these are the people of Israel whom Moses leads out of the state of slavery. These are the people of Plato's Republic, whom the philosopher king rules with wisdom and justice. Like the Tao Te Ching, such texts are political in a much vaster and more intimate sense than we can imagine. To be a warrior in the outer life, one must be a warrior in the inner life. To be a king in the outer life, one must be a king in the inner life. To be a sage in the outer life, one must be a sage in the inner life. Thus, when the Tao Te Ching cautions the ruler against impossible concepts of good and evil unto his people, it is also cautioning us against cutting ourselves off from the vital forces within ourselves through attachment to mental or emotional judging of ourselves. To read anything in the Tao Te Ching is merely advice for the outer life. It is, putting it bluntly, to desecrate it, that is, to pack it into our own store of illusions, the sum total of which has made our individual and collective life on earth a hypnotic sleep that could very well end with our eyes still closed. But to read it as applying simultaneously to the outer life and to our inner life is to feel ourselves invited to the life of searching that will be supported by the strongest and greatest energies in the universe.